Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1968 horror film, Night of the Living Dead. Now, before I go any further, I would like to give a special shout out to longtime friend and subscriber of mine, Jonathan, for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, when it comes to this film, I have what might be considered a kind of controversial opinion of it. I'm not a big fan of this movie. It's one of those movies that I appreciate immensely for what it did for the genre or the subgenre of zombie films. I mean, the zombie film as we know it today, in a lot of ways, is due to the template that was created by this film and by Romero. So it's one of those things where I appreciate the film so much for that. I also appreciate the film for breaking new ground in horror cinema, especially at the time. I appreciate it for what it did for Romero's career and putting him on the map. There are a lot of things that I do genuinely appreciate about this film. That doesn't mean that I have to like it, let alone love the movie. It's one of those films that I think the impact that it has had on culture and specifically cinema in general is greater than the overall quality of the film itself. And I know that's an opinion that's going to rile some people and rile some feathers. And you know what? Fine. I'd rather be honest when it comes to films and even highly regarded and critically acclaimed movies like this than lie to you. And honestly, I think this film is just at best okay and at worst kind of below average. I think Dawn of the Dead is a million times better than this movie. I also think Day of the Dead is better. And I know this is also going to spark some controversy, but I also think the 1990 remake is a better film. At least to me and my personal tastes. And before anyone says anything about my taste in horror films being bad or being trash because I don't love this movie, I just mentioned Dawn of the Dead. I'm wearing a John Carpenter's Halloween hat, and I also really like William Friedkin's The Exorcist, and Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street, and a lot of these other critically acclaimed and highly regarded horror films that are on the same lists that this film is on. I even like other films from this time period quite a bit, like Robert Wise's The Haunting. So it's not one of those things where, oh yeah, my film taste is just terrible, and that's why I haven't developed a taste for this film. It's just one of those things where it's just a personal taste thing, and this film just doesn't do it for me. I think the script isn't nearly as interesting as a lot of these other writers and essayists have made it out to be. I don't think the characters are that strong, except for the lead, Ben. I think it's not really that engaging of a film consistently. I think it's rather dull throughout a good chunk of the running time. And it's a movie that has some great atmosphere, I'll give it that. There's some really creepy, eerie shots and some good cinematography. And I think there are some sequences that are rather powerful. And I think there's also a couple good performances in this movie. And I think for a low-budget film and for a first-time filmmaker, I think Romero did a good job directing it for what it is. But that's really about it. Like, it's one of those movies where I just am not a fan. And I'll explain why in detail soon enough. Now, it's directed by George A. Romero. And Romero wanted to make a movie, and he was really passionate about doing some kind of film project at this time. In fact, the initial idea was like a alien and sci-fi horror hybrid, but they didn't have enough money to build a spaceship, so they decided to do something different. So you have the writer, John Russo, who at least the co-writer, because George Romero also wrote the film too. So you have John Russo, who did a short story that I think might have been unpublished or something, and it dealt with the dead coming back to life. And so they decided to collaborate together and they came up with what ultimately became Night of the Living Dead. And for a relative first-time filmmaker, because I think he had shot some short films before this, but this was his first feature film, if I remember correctly. And if it wasn't, I apologize. But I think Romero, considering the circumstances, considering the $100,000 budget, considering the limitations that he had, I think it's a well shot film. There's some good bits of cinematography. There's some good direction in terms of utilizing different types of camera angles and perspectives, and having the camera pan and zoom in certain areas to create a certain mood or atmosphere. And I do feel that one of the most consistently solid things about this film is Romero's direction. I think he would go on to do even better and even grander and even more spectacular work later on in his career. But you could already see from this film and from what he did with this movie that this is a guy who had potential to go on to do great things. So, yeah, I would say that you still see a lot of what Romero became known for as a filmmaker in this film, even with everything that he was working with, which wasn't much. He was kind of working with bare bones here, and he did a lot with it. The screenplay by John Russo and George A. Romero. This is a script that, to me personally, is not anywhere near as deep as so many people make it out to be. The only reason why this film is considered to be such a amazing work of social commentary and subtext is because of all of the essays and all of the write-ups that have been made about this film years after its release. It's not because of what's in the script, because even Romero himself has said that his intent was not to have a commentary about the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, because he just finished post-production of the film when that assassination occurred. He did not write this film as some bit of social commentary about race relations in the United States at the time. That really wasn't the case. I mean, the original draft of the script had a white man as Ben, and there was no change that he made when it comes to the ending of the movie when an African American was cast to play Ben. In fact, Romero has said that he cast Ben because he was the best actor, not because of the color of his skin. But here we have all of these videos and essays and almost entire books that talk about what Romero was trying to say about society at the time. And Romero has refuted that. Romero has fought against that. And now he's no longer with us, and people are still trying to perpetuate this false narrative about what Romero had in mind for this film. It originally was going to be a sci-fi horror alien invasion kind of movie. So why do people think that he had this intent from the very beginning with this low budget film that was essentially going to be his first movie, that he had some grand plan, some grand vision of how he was going to handle some touchy social commentary, is beyond me. Are there some elements of it? Yeah, you could see that there's little bits and pieces here with some of the interactions between Ben and Mr. Cooper, or some of the other aspects of the movie, but a lot of it is just being applied to the film by hindsight and by other people's interpretation of what's on the page, and not necessarily what's there. And the fact that you have these people actively saying that Romero was wrong about his own movie is ridiculous to me, because I'm seeing that a lot. I've read articles where they point this out, that actually Romero said this about the movie, and this really wasn't what his intention was, and so on. And then you have people like offer rebuttal where they say, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's clearly obvious what he intended because look what's there. No, it's what you're seeing is there. It's your interpretation of what he wrote. And I'm sorry, to elevate your interpretation of what somebody wrote and what somebody created above the creator's opinion of it is just absurd to me and incredibly unfair and devaluing the opinion of Romero himself. So if you have the interpretation that this film is some big social commentary piece, cool, fine, but also acknowledge and appreciate and respect Romero's take on it on the same level. That's all I'm trying to say here. And I'm going to side with Romero on this because, like I said, he's the one that wrote. He was a co-writer on this, and he directed the film. So if anybody knows what his concept and what he was trying to do with the film was, it's him. I mean, the ending was the same. When the color of the skin of the character Ben was white. So it was not really intended, the ending was never really necessarily intended to be what people say it is. They just applied a lot of this stuff to it in hindsight because of the fact that the lead was an African American. And I get it, I understand. But that's not what Romero actually intended. And when you actually break down this script, there's a lot of things about it that really are pretty amateur. Like there's so many scenes where they just repeat themselves. Like the whole stuff with the cellar, the debate between Ben and Mr. Cooper about the cellar. Ben is like, I don't want to go in the cellar. And Mr. Cooper's like, you need to go in the cellar because that's where it's the safest. And there's just a repetitive bit of writing when it comes to that, where there's just numerous scenes. I think there's at least 3 scenes that are not that far apart from one another that are just having the same argument about the cellar. And that's pretty amateur writing. And then you have some other aspects of the script that are just an example of a writer who is just trying to pad things out. Because initially it was a different concept and a different script entirely. And if you even read or listen to interviews with some of the other people involved with the films, they didn't even have like dialogue fully written out. So there's a lot of time where these inexperienced actors and actresses have to improvise their own lines. And then there's other things where you just have stuff that happens or is there to just kind of pass the time. And like I said, just pad things out. Because it seems like it was a short story that was then stretched out to a feature length. And it really does show. Like this is something that would be more effective if it was like in an episode of Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone episodes are notorious about their messages and about social commentary, things like that. But they were like 25, 30 minutes long. They weren't 96 minutes. And when you try to stretch an episode of like the Twilight Zone from the time out to feature length, it's going to be slow. It's going to have points where it's not really going to maintain your interest. And I do feel that there's a lot of stuff where nothing happens. They're sitting around and they're boarding up the windows, or they're watching TV or listening to the radio, or they're having repetitive conversations. And when it comes to the zombies, yeah, there's stuff where there's scenes where the zombies do things like break through the house and eat people and do all of that, but it takes a while for that to happen. A lot of it's just this very slow build. Even the opening at the graveyard, which is admittedly a decent opening to the film, but even then the writing doesn't really live up to the full potential of the scene because the zombie attacks and you never see anything. It just looks like the zombie's getting into a wrestling match with the brother of Barbara. Doesn't even look like they're actually having some sort of deadly confrontation. It doesn't even look like anything that would make Barbara so shocked. And that's the other thing. I get it. Some people react to scenarios that involve something traumatizing by going into a shocked state. And they essentially are shell shocked. But that doesn't make for compelling viewing. It doesn't make for a compelling character where you have half of the runtime featuring her just doing nothing and just being, other than being hysterical or just being a catatonic mute. I understand that's something that does actually occur in reality, but it doesn't make for very exciting viewing. At the same time, doesn't make sense that she's this catatonic when you didn't really see anything that was that horrifying that would really make her believably be that stunned. I also feel that the way that a lot of the characters are written, there's not a lot of depth, and that could be okay if there was more personality with some of these characters, or they were more likable in other ways. I mean, even the way that Ben is written, there are some moments with his character where even he's not that likable because he is willing to leave Mr. Cooper's wife. I think it's, yeah, the wife there to die. And actually, I don't think it's the wife. I think it's one of these characters. It's one of the characters in the film. It might be Mrs. Cooper, but it also might be this other character, Judy. But I don't think it's Judy, though, because Judy's the one that I believe is there with her boyfriend when the truck explodes. So he's willing to let this woman get eaten by zombies, and he doesn't do anything to help her. And I guess a lot of people have interpreted this as intentional. Like, the whole point is to show that in a crisis situation, people don't change. Like, they just are trying to survive, and they're going to do whatever it takes to survive, and that means being selfish and so on. And I get that, but that just makes the characters even more one note, because now, oh, they just all act the same. There's not really a lot of variation to them, except for the one that's catatonic and just sits there and does nothing. And I know they're maybe trying to create some sort of blurred lines with Ben and Mr. Cooper, but I don't really feel that translates that well. But yeah, there's just a good chunk of the movie where it's just Ben and Barbara, and mostly just Ben doing things because Barbara's just doing nothing. And then now Cooper and the rest of the cast just appear out of nowhere because they were just hanging out in the house. And I've read a lot of critiques and I've seen a lot of people talk about how nuanced and how complex the interactions are between these characters, and I just don't see it. I really don't. I don't see it in the script. I don't see it in the dialogue. A lot of the back and forth in terms of their moral compass is stuff that's really not that unique or not that interesting. And then when you get to what is ultimately the climax, the best character in the film, and Ben, he gets shot, and the movie ends, and it's depressing and it's dark. Of course, there's some other stuff before that I think does actually work quite well, like the scene in the cellar with the Cooper's daughter, and when she becomes a zombie and kills her mother. Like, I think honestly, I think that's the most effective scene in the movie, other than the ending of the film with the photographs and everything. Because yeah, it is a downbeat ending, but it works. I think it works for the tone of the film and for what the movie really seemed to be, which was a film that just had this permeating sense of dread throughout it, and hopelessness, and just this impending doom. And so the ending, I think, is rather effective and works in this film's favor. And it's a big reason why the movie is honestly at all memorable, is because of the ending. Because for the time, that was rather shocking, that was rather unnerving, that wasn't something you saw a lot of. In fact, a lot of this film was rather shocking and unnerving for the time period. Nowadays, it's very tame. except for maybe a couple scenes, but most of the time it's just very tame stuff compared to other films that you might see today, for instance. But for the time, man, this was some shocking stuff. And I give it a lot of credit for going for it, going for the jugular in that regard. But it just doesn't pan out into a very satisfying whole for me. It's just one of those movies where the opening, the graveyard, they're coming to get you, Barbara. Okay, kind of fun. Then kind of drop the ball because the confrontation between the brother and the zombie isn't really much. Then Barbara is just hysterical or crying or just useless for most of the movie. I get what they were trying to do, but I just don't care for it. The stuff with Mr. Cooper and Ben, I'm the boss up here. Oh, I'm the boss down here. It's like, I don't care who's the boss. The only who's the boss I care about is the one starring Tony Danza. But this is one of those things where I'm just like, I don't really give a shit about this back and forth between these characters, this contentious fighting, especially because I just, like I said, I wasn't that into the film, so the drama doesn't really add anything for me. It just seems like it's just thrown in there to make this feel like it's more of a feature film experience instead of a short film. And even like some of the like, what is it? I think his name is Tom. Yeah, Tom and his girlfriend Judy, didn't really care that much about those characters either. So there's either characters that I'm indifferent on completely, like Mrs. Cooper and her daughter, or characters that I don't like or don't care about at all, like Barbara or the two teens. And even the stuff with like the radio broadcasts or the stuff on TV, like it's kind of interesting, especially the radio stuff. The TV stuff I didn't find as interesting as the radio stuff because a lot of it just allowed you to use your imagination. And there were a fair amount of scenes in the film where I'm not even paying attention to the actors in a scene or what's going on in that sequence because the stuff that's on the radio in the background is more interesting. It is more captivating to me. And that's not a good sign. So, yeah, it's just one of those scripts that I don't see the brilliance. I really don't. You got repetitive dialogue, you have repetitive scenes, you got scenes where not much of anything happens. You got stuff with the zombies outside the house and stumbling around and moaning and looking creepy. You got the scenes where they're eating the corpses and it's pretty effective and it's pretty grisly. You've got the ending, which is bleak but effective. But like if it had a happy ending, for instance, and the lead was not played by an African American, would this really be considered that groundbreaking or that amazing of a film? Let's be honest here. And if that's the case, I think you're just putting too much on this film and just elevating it based on things that aren't even necessarily there. The ingredients aren't necessarily there. You're just inventing them in your head and you're throwing them in there and you're adding them in there when a lot of it is just kind of this bland porridge. Except with, a little bit of spices, a little bit of stuff that's thrown in there to add some flavor. The cast, other than Duane Jones as Ben, who was once again cast because he was the best actor for the role, not because he was black, which is something that honestly I think a lot of producers and casting directors today could take a page from. Cast the right actor for the role, whether they're African American, white, Asian, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever sexuality, just cast the right person for the role. Who is the best actor? And that's what George Romero did. And what's sad is Duane, he did some films like Anja and Hess and Beat Street, but he never really went on to a pretty lucrative or big career as an actor, and that's unfortunate because he showed a lot here. I thought he was great. He's easily one of the best things about the movie, and one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of the film, but I can't say that I hate it. I can't say that it outright sucks because of what Duane Jones brings to the film. Very likable character, even though there's some things that he does that are not really that likable. Shows some selfish attitudes, but it makes sense in the context of the film and the script. And because Duane just has this personality to him that is just amicable, he still makes it work. And when there's that scene where he's in the cellar and the hopelessness settles in, and it's like he's in his own sunken place, it's a really effective scene. And it's really sad because you genuinely feel for him and you want him to make it out of this night of hell. And it just isn't going to happen. But yeah, just a very excellent performance. A lot of nuance, a lot of subtleties, a lot of variety to it, a lot of believable hints and notes when it comes to his overall performance. Cannot sing enough praises when it comes to Duane Jones as Ben. Although as good as he is, I honestly would give a slight edge to Tony Todd in his take on the character in the 1990 remake, but that's just me. But he still does a really great job in this. Judith O'Dea, though, I honestly don't think she was that great. I'm not going to sit here and say that she sucked outright because there are some scenes where she's playing the catatonic mute or she's showing emotion without saying a line of dialogue, and that's something that's rather difficult to pull off. And I think she did that well, but when it comes to her like having any lines of dialogue, I thought it was pretty bad. But that's just me. I know a lot of people think she did a really good job, but it's just one of those things where we agree to disagree. I think Patricia Tallman was a million times better in a lot of different ways compared to Judith O'Dea in this film. I give her a lot of credit though. She did her own stunts. She was a trooper, and it's one of those things where she made the most that she could out of not a lot, because she also had to improvise a lot of lines. So maybe some of the line delivery being a bit flat or a bit awkward at times maybe isn't entirely her fault, because she had nothing to work with at times, so she just had to come up with it on the fly. Karl Hardman, he played Harry Cooper. A lot of the time he's overacting, and I at best is just kind of a meh performance to me. He didn't really act in a lot before this and didn't really act in a lot afterwards. He was one of the producers. And the actress Marilyn Eastman, who played his wife Helen, she was also one of the producers. She helped finance the film, but she also assisted with the makeup and the sound. And she played the role of some other zombie that eats a bug. So she did a lot of work. She was a woman of many talents. And I would say I thought she was better than her husband. Kyra Schoen, who played Karen Cooper, fine for what the role was. Definitely was the most effective when it comes to the scene where she's a zombie. I actually thought she was effectively creepy and a little scary. But it also might have been more to how Romero shot the scene than really what she brought to it. But it was still fine. She still did a good job. Keith Wayne as Tom. Not that terrific. Not that great. Really not the best performance. The guy even didn't really go on to do anything when it comes to acting. In fact, this is his only acting role, and you can kind of see why. And then you have the actress who played Judy, his girlfriend, and honestly, I thought she was even worse. Apparently, she auditioned to play Barbara, but as much as I'm not a big fan of Judith O'Dea, she act circles around this actress. There's a reason why this actress didn't have a whole lot of scenes or lines of dialogue, because she just didn't have the talent. And of course, you also have like Bill Hinzman, who plays the first ghoul that was encountered by Barbara and Johnny in the cemetery. Then he would go on to be in Flesh Eater, and he directed The Majorettes, and he would be one of those guys who would just hang on to dear life when it comes to him being a part of this movie and being in the film as his claim to fame. But yeah, honestly, pretty weak cast. I just have to be honest here. Other than Duane Jones, a lot of actors, a lot of performances that aren't really that impressive, aren't really that incredible, aren't really that layered. And I will give the film this. It's got some good cinematography by Romero, who also was a cinematographer. Some great looking shots at night. Some good shots of the zombies walking towards the house, or the zombies walking through the house, or the shots at the end with the hunters and so on, or the opening in the graveyard. He also did the editing in the film. So he's to blame for some choppy edits, but I give him a pass because he's trying to direct, co-write, and do the cinematography on the film and do the editing all at once. So I give him a pass. Also, a lot of films around this time kind of looked a little choppy at times, especially lower budgeted movies. And the film also features music it's just stock music. They use stock music here that they were able to find that I think was like royalty free, and might have remixed it a little bit, but the music didn't really do anything for me. I definitely feel that I felt that was pretty lacking. Sounded pretty generic even for this time period. I think the usage of stock music was done a lot better in Dawn of the Dead. But I don't really know what else to say about the film. I know it's a movie that's got a massive cult following, and a lot of people praise it and love the movie and think it's great, and they watch it every October, and they think it's one of the best zombie films, if not one of the best horror films ever. And it's just one of those films where I just agree to disagree. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that it sucks and it's a total piece of shit, because that's not true. For what Romero was able to do with such a little budget, it does have some effective sequences. It does have some moments where it does shine, but it doesn't shine nearly enough for me. And that's why I'm just not a fan of the film. And the social commentary, I don't think it's as deep as people make it out to be. So that's not enough to make the film great in my eyes either. And it's just one of those movies where, compared to its reputation, I just don't feel that it's on the same level as its critical reputation suggests, as its reputation suggests among film scholars and essayists. And it's just one of those movies where I'm glad it exists in a lot of different ways because of what it did for cinema and for the genre of zombie films and for horror movies, but that doesn't mean that I have to be a big fan of it. So a lot of films are acquired tastes, whether you agree with the critical consensus or not. And this is no exception. There are some people who disagree completely with what I said throughout this entire video, and that's fine. And they agree with the consensus, and they think the film is great and phenomenal, and they think it's so deep and thought-provoking and so on and so forth. But then there's other people who share similar sentiments to me, who aren't that big of a fan of it, who don't think it's as great as a lot of people are making it out to be. And I think that's fine too. If it's okay for people to agree with the consensus on a film like this, then it should be equally as acceptable to go against the grain. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Night of the Living Dead, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.